The Montana mountains stretched endlessly before James Crawford, each ridge bleeding into the next, beneath a sky the color of gunmetal. As a Navy SEAL attached to a joint task force operation, he'd seen deserts that could cook a man alive, jungles where the humidity felt like drowning, and urban war zones where death waited around every corner. But this frozen wilderness presented its own brutal challenges, a different kind of enemy that killed with silent efficiency. His breath formed small clouds that dissipated instantly in the -15-degree air. Ice crystals had formed on his beard, and despite his advanced cold-weather gear, the chill was working its way into his bones. The wind cut through the pine forest like razor blades, carrying with it the promise of an even worse storm approaching from the north. "Reaper 1, this is command. Weather window closing in 30 mics. Advise status." The voice crackled through his earpiece, distorted by the atmospheric conditions. James pressed 2 fingers against his throat mic, the fabric of his glove rough against the tactical device. "Command, Reaper 1. 2 clicks from checkpoint Delta, proceeding with reconnaissance, visibility decreasing." The mission brief had been straightforward on paper. Confirm reports of smuggling activity near the Canadian border, approximately 40 miles from the small town of Eureka. Intelligence suggested a trafficking network was using the remote mountain passes to move contraband south, everything from drugs to weapons. What started as routine Border Patrol concerns had escalated dramatically when Homeland Security intercepted communications mentioning military-grade equipment, a next shipment. That's when they'd called in naval special warfare. James moved through the pine forest with practiced silence, each step deliberate and controlled. His white camouflage blended seamlessly into the snow-laden landscape, making him nearly invisible to anyone more than 20 feet away. The weight of his gear, rifle, ammunition, survival equipment, communications gear, was distributed perfectly across his body, the result of years of training and countless missions in hostile territory. The wind howled through the trees like a living thing, creating nature's white noise, perfect cover for movement, but equally perfect for ambush. James's situational awareness remained at peak level, his eyes constantly scanning, his ears filtering the natural sounds from anything artificial or threatening. His training had taught him to read terrain like a scholar reads ancient texts. The disturbed snow ahead told a story written in the language of violence, boot prints, multiple sets, drag marks suggesting someone had been pulled against their will, signs of struggle where feet had fought for purchase. His pulse remained steady as his gloved hand moved to his rifle, thumb clicking off the safety. Something had happened here, and recently, within the last 6 to 8 hours, judging by how much fresh snow had accumulated in the tracks. The scene materialized through the swirling snow like something from a nightmare that couldn't be blinked away. James dropped to one knee behind a fallen log, rifle raised, scanning the clearing through his magnified scope. The crosshairs swept across the area methodically, left to right, near to far, checking every shadow and depression that could hide a threat. A man in Border Patrol winter gear was bound to a thick pine tree, his head slumped forward against his chest. His arms were pulled behind the trunk, secured with multiple zip ties that cut into the fabric of his jacket. But what held James's attention, what made him pause and reassess the entire situation, was the German shepherd lying pressed against the officer's legs, unmoving except for the subtle rise and fall of its ribcage. James spent 3 full minutes observing before making any move. No fresh tracks besides those he'd already noted approaching from the north. No movement in the surrounding forest, no heat signatures through his thermal monocular, no sounds except wind and the occasional crack of ice-laden branches. The smugglers had moved on, likely hours ago, leaving their captive to freeze, either as a warning to other law enforcement or simply because dead men tell no tales. He approached in a tactical crouch, weapon ready, each step placed carefully to avoid making sound. "Federal agent," he announced quietly when he was 10 feet away. "I'm here to help. Stay calm." The officer's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and clouded with the dangerous lethargy of hypothermia. His lips were blue, his face pale as the snow around them, and James could see ice crystals forming in the man's facial hair. The name tape on his jacket read Morrison in faded letters that suggested years of service. "Morrison, can you hear me? I'm James Crawford, Naval Special Warfare Command. How long have you been here?" 6. "Maybe 7 hours?" Daniel Morrison managed through chattering teeth, each word requiring visible effort. They took my radio, my sidearm, left me for the cold, to..." James was already cutting through the zip ties with his combat knife, the tactical blade making quick work of the heavy plastic. "Your dog stayed with you the whole time." "Max wouldn't leave. Trained him myself. 3 years. But the cold told him to run. Get help. He wouldn't." As the restraints fell away, James understood what he was witnessing. The German shepherd, Max, hadn't simply remained by his handler's side out of obedience or confusion. The dog had positioned himself as a living blanket, using his body heat to keep Daniel's core temperature from dropping into fatal territory. The snow beneath them was compressed and partially melted from hours of shared warmth, creating a small depression that had actually helped shield them from the worst of the wind. Max's thick winter coat was covered in ice, but the dog had never moved, never sought the shelter of the nearby rocks or trees. "Smart dog," James said, quickly assessing Daniel's condition with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd performed battlefield triage dozens of times. Severe hypothermia, evident from the confusion and lethargy, possible frostbite on his fingers and face, the skin showing the telltale white patches, dehydration, but alive, and that was what mattered. "Max might have just saved your life, Morrison. Without him, you'd already be gone." James keyed his throat mic, speaking clearly and calmly, despite the urgency of the situation. "Command Reaper 1. I have 1 Border Patrol officer, critical hypothermia, and his K9, requesting immediate medical evac at my position. Patient is priority red. Repeat, priority red." Static answered him. Then more static, punctuated by brief bursts of fragmented words that meant nothing. James checked his radio, fully functional, battery good, but the mountains and the worsening storm were creating an electronic dead zone. The weather was deteriorating fast, heavy snow beginning to fall in thick curtains that reduced visibility to less than 50 feet. "We need to move," James said, helping Daniel to his feet. The Border Patrol agent immediately collapsed, his legs unable to support his weight, muscles locked and unresponsive from hours of immobility in freezing temperatures. Max stood, shaking snow from his fur in a spray of white, and pressed against Daniel's side with a low whine that spoke of concern and exhaustion. "I can't feel my feet," Daniel said, his voice weak and slurred. "Just leave me. Get yourself out. You don't owe me anything." "Not happening, Morrison." James pulled emergency heat packs from his survival kit, activating them with sharp cracks and pressing them against Daniel's core and neck, the critical areas for warming. "I didn't spend 12 weeks in Hell Week, didn't survive Ramadi and Kandahar to abandon people in the snow. That's not who we are." He wrapped his own insulated jacket around Daniel, then fashioned a makeshift sling from paracord, creating a system that would allow him to help support the officer's weight. The extraction point was 2 kilometers south, manageable distance under normal conditions with a healthy person, nearly impossible with a hypothermic casualty in deteriorating weather conditions that were approaching whiteout. A sound froze James mid-motion. Voices, distant but approaching from the north, speaking Spanish in the rapid-fire cadence of people who weren't expecting problems. The smugglers were returning, probably to retrieve something they'd left behind or to confirm their victim was dead. James's mind calculated instantly, running through tactical scenarios with the speed of a supercomputer. He couldn't carry Daniel and fight effectively. The voices were coming from the north, between them and the extraction point. 3, maybe 4 distinct voices, all male, confident. Max stood rigid, ears forward, a growl building in his chest that James recognized as a warning. "Easy, boy," James whispered, his hand briefly touching the dog's head. He pulled Daniel into the dense underbrush 20 meters from the tree, moving quickly but carefully, Max following without command. From his pack, James retrieved a thermal blanket, military grade, designed to mask heat signatures, wrapping it around Daniel and the dog together. "Stay absolutely still," James instructed. "No matter what happens, don't move, don't make a sound. Understand?" Daniel nodded weakly, already being pulled back toward unconsciousness by his body's desperate need to conserve energy. 3 men emerged into the clearing, heavily armed with civilian AR-15 variants and wearing expensive winter gear that marked them as professionals, not desperate amateurs. These were organized criminals with serious backing. "El oficial ya debe estar muerto," one said, laughing without humor. "The officer should be dead by now. Nadie sobrevive 7 horas en este frío." James watched through his scope, finger resting beside the trigger guard, heart rate steady at 60 beats per minute. 3 armed hostiles, possibly more nearby. No backup, no air support. A critical casualty who needed immediate medical attention. Taking them would mean a firefight that would alert anyone else in the area and potentially get Daniel killed in the crossfire. One of the smugglers walked toward the tree, his boots crunching in the snow. He stopped suddenly, seeing the cut zip ties lying in the snow like abandoned snakes. "Mierda! Someone cut him loose! Busquen! He can't be far!" James's decision crystallized with absolute clarity. He couldn't fight them here, not with Daniel helpless and Max potentially getting caught in crossfire. Survival meant evasion, and evasion meant movement. As the smugglers began searching the area, fanning out in a standard sweep pattern, James moved with Daniel and Max deeper into the forest. He used every technique he'd learned in SEAL training, moving during wind gusts to mask sound, using terrain features for concealment, staying in the thickest areas of vegetation. Each step was calculated, each sound monitored, each decision weighed against the competing priorities of speed and stealth. Daniel's condition was deteriorating despite the heat packs, his speech becoming increasingly slurred, his movements uncoordinated when James needed him to help with the walking. The officer was sliding into severe hypothermia, the kind that preceded cardiac arrest and death. "Stay with me, Morrison," James urged, supporting most of Daniel's weight while maintaining situational awareness of their surroundings. "Talk to me. Tell me about Max. How long have you worked together?" 3 years, Daniel mumbled, his words barely intelligible. Best partner I ever had. Never failed a mission. Never left my side. Good dog. Such a good..." The dog walked ahead, occasionally looking back as if checking their progress, breaking trail through the deep snow. James recognized the intelligence in those eyes. Max understood his handler was in danger, understood they were being pursued, understood the urgency of the situation without needing commands. After an hour of exhausting travel that felt like 10, covering maybe half a kilometer, James found what he needed. A small cave, barely large enough for the 3 of them, but offering protection from the wind and concealment from visual detection. He guided Daniel inside and immediately began more aggressive warming protocols. His own core temperature was dropping too. Even his advanced training had limits. The SEAL conditioning that taught him to function in extreme conditions was the only thing keeping him operational, but he knew he had maybe 2 more hours before he'd start experiencing his own hypothermia symptoms. "Command, Reaper 1, how copy?" "Static. Still no signal." The storm was creating a perfect electronic blackout. Daniel's eyes closed, his breathing becoming shallow and irregular. James knew the signs intimately. Severe hypothermia could trigger cardiac arrest as the heart muscle became too cold to function properly. He needed to get Daniel's temperature up, but slowly and carefully. Too fast could cause cardiac complications as cold blood from the extremities rushed back to the core. Max lay down beside Daniel, once again sharing body heat with that same unwavering dedication. James joined them, using their combined warmth in the enclosed space to create a survival microclimate. It wasn't proper medical care, wasn't what Daniel needed, but it was keeping him alive, buying time until rescue could arrive. "Your dog's smarter than most humans I've served with," James said, more to keep Daniel conscious than anything else, knowing that sleep could be fatal. "What made you become a border patrol agent?" "Family tradition," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. "My dad served 30 years in the border patrol, Montana sector. He always said, protecting borders isn't about politics, it's about people, keeping families safe, stopping the bad guys, making a difference." Hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. The storm raged outside their shelter, the wind screaming like a wounded animal. James maintained radio contact attempts every 15 minutes, knowing that eventually the atmospheric conditions might shift enough for a signal to get through. Finally, as darkness began to fall and James was calculating whether they'd need to spend the night in the cave, he heard it. "Reaper 1, command, weak signal, confirm your position." James rattled off coordinates from his GPS, hope surging through him for the first time in hours. "Command, 1 critical casualty, severe hypothermia, possibly frostbite, need immediate medical evac. LZ will be hot, hostiles in area." "Copy, Reaper 1, helo inbound, 20 minutes. Can you signal your position?" James checked his equipment. 1 IR strobe left, invisible to the naked eye but bright as a beacon through night vision. "Affirmative. Will mark position with IR strobe." The helicopter's rotors cut through the winter silence like salvation made audible, the distinctive whoomp 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 of a Black Hawk cutting through the storm. James activated the IR strobe, the invisible to naked eye beacon guiding the helicopter to their position, like a lighthouse guiding ships through fog. The helicopter landed in a clearing 30 meters away, and medics rushed out with a stretcher and advanced warming equipment, moving with the efficiency of people who'd done this countless times before. "We've got him," the lead paramedic said, immediately checking vitals and starting IV fluids and advanced warming protocols. "Core temp is 89 degrees. He's damn lucky to be alive. The dog stays with him?" "The dog saved his life," James said firmly, his voice carrying absolute authority. "He stays with the patient, non-negotiable." Max jumped into the helicopter without hesitation, lying down beside Daniel's stretcher as if he'd done it 100 times before. The Border Patrol agent's eyes opened slightly, awareness flickering through the confusion of hypothermia. His hand moved weakly to rest on his partner's head. "Good boy," Daniel whispered, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. Good boy. I love you, Max." At St. Luke Community Hospital in Kalispell, doctors confirmed what James already knew in his gut. Without Max's intervention, Daniel would have died from hypothermia within 3 hours of being abandoned. The dog's body heat, combined with his trained refusal to leave his handler, had created just enough warmth to keep Daniel's core temperature above the critical level where organs begin to fail. It was, the lead physician said, one of the most remarkable cases of survival he'd seen in 20 years of emergency medicine. 2 days later, James visited Daniel's hospital room. The Border Patrol agent was awake, his color returning to normal, fingers and toes showing signs of recovery with minimal permanent damage, a near miracle given the circumstances. "They tell me I owe you my life," Daniel said, extending his hand with genuine warmth. James shook it firmly, then nodded toward Max, who lay on a blanket beside the bed, looking remarkably content. "Thank him. I just did the extraction. He did the saving. He's the real hero here." "The brass wants to give him a medal," Daniel said, scratching Max's ears with obvious affection. "The K9 Valor Award seems appropriate. News crews want interviews, the whole thing." James watched the bond between handler and dog, forged through years of training and daily partnership, tested in the crucible of survival, proven absolutely unbreakable. In his career, spanning multiple deployments and countless operations, he'd seen courage take many forms: soldiers charging enemy positions under fire, medics running into kill zones to save wounded teammates, pilots flying damaged aircraft away from populated areas, teammates sacrificing themselves so others could live. But this was different. This was loyalty in its purest, most undiluted form. No speeches, no cameras, no glory, no audience to witness the heroism. Just a dog who refused to abandon his partner even when every survival instinct screamed to seek shelter from the killing cold. Just a determination to protect that transcended training and touched something deeper, something primal and profound that made the difference between life and death. "You know what the smugglers said when we caught them?" Daniel asked, his voice stronger now. "They said Americans are weak, soft, that we have no loyalty, no honor, that our bonds break under pressure." James smiled grimly, thinking about Max's vigil in the snow. "Guess they haven't met Max, or any of us who refuse to leave people behind." As he left the hospital, stepping out into the Montana cold that no longer seemed quite so hostile, James thought about the mission brief that would be filed. It would detail the reconnaissance operation, the rescue of a federal officer, the successful extraction under hostile conditions. It would mention the dog, the hypothermia, the medical evacuation. But it wouldn't capture the real lesson learned in that frozen Montana wilderness, the truth that mattered more than tactics or procedures. True loyalty doesn't calculate odds or consider convenience. It doesn't wait for permission or seek recognition. It doesn't quit when things get hard or dangerous. It simply stays, through the cold, through the danger, through the impossible hours when giving up would be so much easier and more rational. A dog had taught him that truth in the most profound way possible. And a frozen mountainside had proven what James had always believed but never seen demonstrated so purely. Courage isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and covered in fur, willing to share warmth when the world offers only cold, willing to stay when leaving would save yourself. The smuggling ring had been dismantled 2 days later, 7 arrests made, the trafficking network broken. Daniel would eventually return to full duty, Max beside him as always, and James would carry forward mission after mission with a new appreciation for the loyalty that asks nothing but gives everything. Because in the end, that's what saves us all, not weapons or tactics or technology, but the refusal to abandon each other when things get impossible.